Thanks for staying with us. You're watching Standpoint. Now, Wednesday, the 26th of June, President William Ruto of Kenya made a dramatic U-turn on the controversial finance bill that sparked protests in the East African country by agreeing to withdraw it. But days after, President Ruto bowed to public pressure and agreed to withdraw the bill. Protesters across the country embarked on anti-government demonstrations. This clashed with demonstrators in Nairobi, the capital, spraying tear gas and using rubber bullets. Protests also took place in key cities like Kisumu, Migori, Kisii, Nakuru, and other locations, with the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights claiming that it has credible report of the use of live bullets on protesters. Analysts say, though the finance bill was the trigger, the protest about widespread dissatisfaction with the government, with some protesters in Nairobi calling on President Ruto to resign. Now, joining me to discuss this issue is a policy analyst from Kenya, Benji Undolu. Good to have you join us.
Good afternoon.
So let's talk about President Ruto before we get into this particular crisis and struggle we've seen in the last few days in Kenya. Before this particular crisis at home, he was seen as the jet-setting global voice, especially by the West. And even in Africa, he had some sort of a very good image out there. Did he neglect the discontent or play down the discontent back home?
Yes, good afternoon. Once again, and in the interest of full disclosure, I supported the president in 2022 and before that. He's the former deputy president. And you're right, he's had a lot of resources and time spent cultivating a bit of a Pan-African but more of globalist image as a regional and international leader. This has seen him go to Washington just in the last month or so for a state visit. We haven't had a state visit in 15 years since our late President Mwai Kibaki. He's been to the Vatican, he's been to France, he's been basically everywhere. And in fact, Kenya has recently just signed on as a strategic partner of the Netherlands Treaty Organization, NATO. Now, this has been stuff that can make the country very proud, but at the same time, it has also, stimulated a very serious revolt on the ground. President Ruto is, to be honest, in big trouble. As we speak, for the second time only in the 61-year history of this country, the military stands deployed. In fact, the military is deployed across the country and in all the counties. The youth are very, very angry. I've been out there in the protests. They've come out every week for the last few weeks. There have been deaths. There have been a lot of clashes with police. The youth are fearless. The youth are growing. There's no facilitation. This thing has been a monster that the government cannot understand, but we're here to try to make them understand.
And this is also perhaps the first time in Kenya was seeing a protest that doesn't have a political undertone or a political leadership, and also transcends ethnicity. How weakened is President Ruto domestically now and even globally?
Thank you for the question, because I like to give direct answers. Prior to this crisis, I am very active in policy and very active on social media. And I noticed about 6 months ago, everywhere I went, people were just too angry. And everyone in Kenya now has become an activist. The old people, women, even the church people, the youth, young ladies. This was very shocking to me. And so I started telegraphing my friends in State House and my friends in the media and saying, does the president have any pocket of support left anywhere? In the clashes last week, right in Ruto's home, home ground, right at this backyard, is where the violence was extremely, very sharp and with a lot of, they've destroyed properties of members of parliament. As we speak, a lot of MPs are not able to go home. MPs' offices have been burnt. MPs' homes have been burnt. I've just come in this afternoon from upcountry. My own member of parliament in Machakos County, Fabian Kule, is completely under siege. The district commissioner had rushed there this morning, begging the mammoth crowd not to burn down his house. the president is in big trouble, and that is the truth. Additionally, I watched an MP yesterday explain he's a boomer generation, a nominated member of parliament that narrowly escaped death in the attack on parliament. And he said, we're just trying to look at this thing. We don't understand this animal. So many people, they're not getting paid. They don't have a leader. There's no political leader in front. This whole thing was organized on Twitter over time. And the president just didn't understand this monster. He was too busy, doing all these other things. And there's a lot of looting in government, which the youth especially have stood up even against the church. There's many things happening in Kenya right now, including occupying the church, occupying parliament, march to State House, just to make the president, as of now, I'm told the Kenya Defense Forces have canceled his entire calendar because everywhere he goes, he's meeting too much resistance, there's too much embarrassing, so much booing, even including violence. It's really a time to be alive.
Mm. And we see all of those trends, occupy the church, President Ruto must resign. We see all of that on X, trending. It's just to show the magnitude, of the anger in Kenya. But you said you supported him even while he was deputy president, and then while he was running. He campaigned on the idea of putting, instilling good governance and then putting the poor at the center of his economic policy. Did he not understand the magnitude of the problem, or we're just in a president who is reneging on his promises?
Yeah, that's another good question. I really am appreciating the quality of the questions here. All this turned out to be hot air or hogwash, in the sense that the president was just trying to say whatever the research had showed him that he needed to say, just to win the seat. And so just to show you the level of anger that is in this country, an hour ago, I sent out a tweet and said that I'd be on TVC News in Nigeria, and I invited my audience to watch, and it's a good audience. And immediately a fight broke out on my timeline. You can see it on Twitter, where they said, look, don't tell him that you're going to watch. Don't tell him to say hello to you. Just tell Benji to say on TVC News that Ruto must go. So this is the tagline that everybody's using in this country today. There's been so many concessions. The president has written a letter only today asking for a sit down. He did a press conference where he asked for another sit down. His people have severally, since last week and the week before, said, okay, we've withdrawn the bill. We're willing to talk. But then, the Generation Z, as they understand corruption, they just see that you want to identify a leader so you can compromise him, as you used to do Honorable Raila when he always, fought for the country as opposition. So we've continued to be very leaderless and kind of shadowy in a way. We are also very much calling for people to, avoid breaking the law, to channel their anger in a very formal and constitutional manner. The Law Society of Kenya has been extremely relentless and very quick on their feet to defend those who've been kidnapped and arrested and charged in courts. So a lot of things are happening, and the only constant is the Kenyan anger. The anger on the street is really something, and so it is the fruit of the betrayal that Kenyans feel. They feel the president has a huge trust deficit. Anything that he says, any promises he makes are met with a lot of skepticism, a lot of anger, and people are just saying, look, you're offering all these and that. Mind you, it's not even been 2 years, but we need you to leave office immediately. And I can tell you once again, what a time to be alive.
In terms of,
because anger.
You mentioned that President Ruto is asking for a sit down, with the protesters, but there seem to be diverse opinions on that. Someone like Ojango Omondi, who is of the, I'm trying to get that Social Justice Center, is saying that, look, perhaps it's time to sit down and then also create structures for for this movement. But I think the writer, Nanjula, is saying no, there is no point creating structures and there is no point sitting down. The president needs to do what he needs to do. But what do you make of all of that? Should there be a sit down at this point, structure the way out?
Two things. Number one, there's a real risk of infiltration once you have a bit of a structure, once you have a bit of a pathway. The risk of infiltration is very high because the stakes here are very, very, very high. this kind of status as of today is not sustainable. If President Ruto continues in this way for next couple of days or weeks, demonstrations have been called for next week, Tuesday and Thursday. There have been deaths. There's been a lot of, I don't want to call it provocation of police, but in a sense, that's what it is. It was not going to be tenable. It will not be sustainable. And so this is a big problem in that sense that infiltration is a real risk. The second thing is, once you engage, the trust is so broken. The bad blood is so intense and getting worse that it's almost difficult to see where the middle ground would be. A lot of the people that are opposing the president, and he had a good, core constituency that my estimate is that William Ruto doesn't have any more than about 9% support in the country, and this is because of the huge betrayal that people feel. 9% leaves you with what? Another 91% against. And so just these two factors alone just make the whole process to be very complex and very sensitive and very complicated. It's something that you kind of want to feel sorry for him, but then again, it's a situation that he himself has put himself in, because there's a lot of looting of public resources. There's a lot of wastage of public resources. There's a lot of excesses, and the regime has been tone deaf towards, the anger on the street and really the demands that Kenyans have made that we would like to see a more accountable, government. And so, lastly, maybe I could say the president could have shown more seriousness in moving more resolutely, for instance, to disband the cabinet. His cabinet is really filled with a lot of incompetent hands, in the health docket, in the education docket, at the treasury. I mean, and these are key, these are key positions in government, in key dockets. And so people are not taking his offers seriously. He's lost the goodwill. And, again, this makes for a very tough equation, because how many people can you kill? How many people can you kidnap? How can you run a country, especially a country like Kenya that has known peace really for all of its life? Kenya has been lucky to know peace. People are really disturbed to see the KDF out, to see the president almost trapped. And you can kind of feel that change is in the air. And that's why people are saying Ruto must go. It's a really complex one, lots of drama. And I ask you guys all around the world to pray for us, and also just to keep your eyes here to see what's going on and to tell the story.
And the concern for those who are watching, especially those who are in support of the protesters, is the whether or not the possibility of maintaining and sustaining the unity and momentum, as the protesters continue to seek broader and immediate goals, in this struggle.
I didn't get your question.
I was asking what the possibility is of maintaining and sustaining the unity and momentum we're seeing amongst the protesters, because you had mentioned earlier about the cracks and infiltration, if there is a structure.
Yeah, that's a good question. The idea is too big, and I feel this is also a part of the mistake the president is making. Is he's trying to deal with this animal in the traditional way. Gen Z is not the traditional Gen Z. We didn't have in the 90s all the tools at hand, the TikToks and the Twitter, the organizing capacity and capability. And fourthly, this is an idea whose time has come. The fact that, or the idea that public servants are servants of the people, that the people under Article 1.1 of the Kenyan Constitution passed in 2010 actually have the power that they can exercise directly or delegate to their elected officials. So this realization is going to be, in a new dawn, this is going to be bigger than any infiltration. The usual infiltration is get a few people, pay them some money, get them to drive in a different agenda. But you have to realize the risk of that is anybody that seems to be compromised, is coming under heavy fire and heavy artillery. And so the thing with this kind of digital space and digital age is to kind of be on the right side of history, have the right conversations, be proactive, because you really cannot, it's not easy to fool people, all of the time. I mean, 90% of Kenyans, 40 million people against you and your cabinet, these people are not even using official cars anymore. Members of parliament escaped parliament in ambulances, hit their vehicles, used an emergency tunnel. Cabinet secretaries now are using diplomatic cars and different things. The military is going around in police trucks because there was also a legal issue with orders regarding the deployment. I mean, can you imagine being a leader and literally running away from your own people? You're not able to sit in a member of parliament that I know personally was attacked savagely, physically at a funeral only yesterday. And so this is, I mean, they're human beings, so they're going around very nervous and very scared and very stressed. And many of them, especially from the central part of the country, where most of the support for the president came from, and also from the Rift Valley, where he comes from, a lot of these people are sleeping in hotels. Let that sink in. It's not business as usual.
The saddest part of this is that about close to 20 people, more than 20 people died in this protest, and the president had blamed it on the false, I think he called the false intelligence provided by a security. But people are saying, look, there has to be justice. So what would justice look like? Who should be sanctioned and held culpable?
There's issues with the National Intelligence Service. That's a whole nother fight. There's a war there between the National Intelligence Service and the Deputy President. There appears to be a skirmish also between the Deputy President and the President. Suffice to say, those are all indicators of a completely dysfunctional government. And so what justice would look like is couple of things. Number one, of course, compensation for the victims and the victims' families, very structured compensation to include an apology. Number two, reform in the police force. First of all, the Inspector General, under who all this madness is happening, Japhet Kome, needs to resign immediately. Perhaps this could also include his boss, the Cabinet Secretary for Interior, himself a lawyer, a professor of law. So resignations would be welcome. Sometimes even prosecutions, because you've got shootings, killings of unarmed protesters. Might I remind you that when you had the January 6, 2021 attack on the Capitol in Washington, D.C., a lot of them were ex-military. A lot of them were former police officers, and they came to the Capitol armed. Only 4 got shot. So you cannot have a situation where peaceful, angry, and armed protesters are coming out as per the Constitution and they're ending up dead. So this is still one of the other sticking points that has made the protesters to be very reluctant to enter into any discussions with President Ruto because of, again, the anger and the bad blood that exists because of the attacks on demonstrators, including the ones that, that rushed and got into parliament. There's been killings, and there has to be accountability, there has to be prosecutions, as well as compensations, because a lot of these killings, like for Rex Masai, he was about one of the first killed. Rex was just a good young guy with passion for his country. He wasn't armed, he wasn't dangerous. What are the rules of engagement? That's ridiculous. Police cannot just go around kidnapping people at night and murdering, while the president is giving speeches in Washington looking like a good guy. Young people say no, and there are millions of young people, and you cannot kill all of us. That's our message.
Let's, as we wind down the conversation, I want to take it back to where this actually started, which is the recommendation and advisory from IMF for the president to increase taxes because of, the debt burden in Kenya. I just wanted to ask, because we see that across, not just in Kenya, but across Africa, where these international finance agencies, issue advisories to presidents in Africa, and then it doesn't turn out well for citizens. And I was going to ask you, as a policy analyst, how do you think that African leaders should begin to accede to these advisories that sometimes looks like a one-size-fits-all solutions, and they're not necessarily domesticated?
I'm in a very good position to answer that question because as a policy analyst, I can tell you for free, I have worked with the World Bank on different contracts, specifically with the Office of the Auditor General here. I can tell you that I've been vocal on this issue and have the evidence to that effect. In 2011, even before the national debt was a real problem, I looked at the expenditure, the culture of spending money, and I actually penned in this standard newspaper in Kenya that we have to be very careful with national debt. That was back in 2011. I am on the record explaining and asserting and reiterating Kenyans don't vote for the IMF. This is a weird discussion. You've got debt taking, okay, third world countries that borrow money and then the money is stolen. The money is for a bridge, the money is for a superhighway, the money is for desilting lakes and rivers, etc. And the money ends up building somebody a hotel in Dubai. This is a big problem. I'm sure this is a problem in Nigeria as well. Someone buys a private jet. This is unacceptable. And so this one size fits all recipe that came from the structural adjustment programs in the 80s and the 90s. I mean, this is ridiculous. If I was a president, I wouldn't have this conversation with IMF. You know, countries have to be independent. That's why we fought for independence. People find it preposterous that you can even invoke the name of the IMF. This is a big problem. And I don't mean to be disrespectful, but on the first day that these protests really started to intensify in Kenya, the U.S. ambassador here, Meg Whitman, she immediately left the country. You know, she jumped on a plane and left Kenya, because I can tell you the next engagement and the next phase of this war is going to be right at the feet of the U.S. Embassy. And so Kenyans do not want to hear about the IMF. I don't want to hear about the IMF. I don't care what they need to do, but they need to relook at the debt structure. We need to look at debt refinancing. We need to look at how to offload toxic debt. You know, we need to see evidence of projects for money borrowed. We need to understand on what terms, you know, on what was the fair lending, you know, terms of these debts. Also, was there full disclosure? You cannot just have a few government officials borrowing money on behalf of 90 million people. In the case of Kenya, 50 in Nigeria. In the case of Kenya, 50 million people. And then saddling the country with debt and causing these kinds of crises where you cannot even create jobs, you cannot, you know, sustain the youth, you cannot create opportunity for the youth because 90 shillings of the 100 that you collect goes to paying debt. How do you do your sewer line? How do you, you know, tarmac your roads? How do you pay? How do you meet payroll on in the public service? And so this is, I cannot even. This is, to me, I take the position of the late president of Tanzania, John Pombe Magufuli, who was offered some debt by the Chinese, and it was in a broadcasted meeting. He said, you know, we're not gonna even look at this. You might want to try next door at our brothers, and he meant Kenya. We need very resolute leadership.
All right.
And these kinds of discussions are what are causing the youth to say that Ruto needs to go, so we can find somebody else more radical and somebody else more stringent, focused on serving the Kenyan people, not just serving a small cabal of crooked, selfish politicians.
Thank you so much for your time. We're following developments there in Kenya. We'll continue to report it. Policy analyst from Kenya, Benji Undulu.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
All right, before we go, let's we'll come back to our programming now here in TVC News as we sign off from the program in Makodi, where there has been the national program on improving the gender space in politics.